Test. Sounds good. Not that I'll be that close anyway. I don't know why I tested it that close.
Plus, I love that you spoke into it and go, it sounds good. It's like the only sound you could hear
I meant it
was
looks
yourself.
good.
Oh,
Yeah.
I sound good.
I sound good, yeah. I mean, why not? Hello, everyone, and welcome back to a special episode of Fifth Period, the film appreciation podcast hosted by two media teachers. I'm Mr. Brown, and with me, as always, is...
Mr. Whittle. Hello, everyone. I am very happy to be here on the holidays. I hope everyone is having a great term break, and I hope everyone is taking in as many pieces of media as possible, pieces of art as possible. I certainly am.
Yes, and while you may have noticed our regular school bell has sounded, what was notably absent at the start was our student introduction, and that is, of course, because the classrooms are empty at the moment. We are very much enjoying our school break. As you said, you're hoping people are taking in a lot of films. I haven't taken in too many films myself. I'm letting the team down, but I've been consuming quite a bit of television over the break.
Oh, so. Very good. And obviously, the break's not just for consumption of media. It's for a variety of things. But certainly when I know that as soon as there's couch time available for me, it's game on in terms of watching films and TV.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And while we are in full holiday mode, that does mean our student-selected film has been swapped out this week for one chosen by Mr. Whittle himself.
And yeah, with the fact that it's not the school term as well, we have lifted the parameter of it being a G or PG rated film. I'll be interested to see, like, there's obviously parts of this film that we're talking about, RRR, that has some graphic violence and some deep and dark stuff in it, but maybe if they just edited it a little bit, it could have been a PG rated film. It's not too on the wild side in terms of mature audience content.
Yeah, I suppose because it's so stylized, I think that does help with disguising a lot of the violent aspects.
True, this is true, yes.
But we'll get into that when we start our discussion. Up front, I feel like I should say we gave people an opportunity to watch your film in advance. Next week, we will be doing a film that I have selected for both of us to watch. If anyone would like to screen that in advance, waiting for the podcast to come out, that will be What Lies Beneath. Now, a few podcasts ago, we had Mr. Whittle saying he's just not a Harrison Ford fan. So I'm putting that to the test next week by picking a Harrison Ford, Michelle Pfeiffer film that I think is in amongst some of his best work.
Mm-hmm.
Before we get into our main discussion for today, we will also be discussing our weekly watches later on and trailing a new segment called Tantalising Trailers. This is the first time Mr. Whittle is hearing the name of this segment. I really just like alliteration, so I didn't get that greenlit by him. Yeah. In this segment, we will be looking at a couple of different trailers that have been released in the last week and discuss our anticipation for those. So if you would like to skip ahead to anything today, I will put time codes in the description below.
Cool beans.
Before we discuss our film today too, we should probably put out our obligatory spoiler warning. I would say this film is probably one of the ones where we need the spoiler warning a little bit more. There are some pretty epic things that happen, and I feel like they are really exciting to see for the very first time without any of that being revealed. And because it's a relatively new film, I suspect a lot of people wouldn't have seen it.
Yeah, new film, and I would put it out there that maybe a bit culturally diverse compared to what we would normally be putting forward on the podcast. So it may not have crossed people's paths as much. So yeah, certainly do go check it out. It is streaming on Netflix. I assume, Mr. Brown, that you watched the English overdub version.
I did watch the English overdub.
Yeah, so being a Tengali film, it's also released in Hindi. Just make sure that, you don't have to. You watch it any way you want, guys. But I do recommend the English overdub version just because you get to immerse yourself more in the visual element if you're not reading subtitles.
I'm not sure the Hindi version is the original version either.
No, it's not.
So because this is a Tollywood film, I did a lot of looking into Tollywood versus Bollywood over the last couple of days. And in terms of the stylistic qualities now, they say they're not too dissimilar, but it's a regional thing. Bollywood films, they speak Hindi, and is it Telugu or
Telugu. Yeah.
For Tollywood films. So the release that's on Netflix, it's not even the original version anyway. So I think it would be interesting to see the original because obviously there's a lot of cross-language use in it. So a lot of characters do just speak in English throughout the film. So it'd be pretty interesting to see how much that actually plays into it.
I also think that sometimes when you watch a film that's in a foreign language and you choose the English overdub version, you can very much tell that it's post-production voice acting, and it just comes across clunky. Like a film I watched last year, All Quiet on the Western Front, was German film, and within 5 minutes of watching it with the English overdubs, I switched to the German version and just read the subtitles instead because I felt there's a sincerity with it. But for this particular film, if you are going to watch it, then I think the English overdubs work just fine for this one.
They do such a good job with the voice acting
Yes.
in the overdub that you don't really even notice. Like,
No.
very quickly, it just becomes normal.
Yeah. So, obviously, this is a 2022 film, RRR. So,
Set in 1920.
yeah, set in the 1920s, loosely based on some historic stuff. But then there's the disclaimer right at the start saying it's based on a couple of past people.
The two main characters are Indian, revolutionaries.
Yeah, but the actual events did not occur in the slightest.
Hard to believe, though. They're very realistic depictions.
This movie actually copped a bit of flack on release from some haters on, the fact that they did kind of make it but they're quite clear on it being historical fiction from the outset. So, they did not intend for it to be coming across as fact at all. But because there's still that inference there, I can still see why the critics of historical fiction in general kind of go, well, you are still influencing people's understanding of historical facts. It's the same with that show, The Crown, which is very much clearly historical fiction based on a premise of fact, but it's had its critics as well.
Well, yeah, I heard a lot of the criticism came from their depictions of the British and how cruel they were.
Yeah.
But we will get into that. Another thing that they disclaim right at the start is about the use of animals within the film. And as soon as I read the disclaimer and it said that no animals or birds were harmed in the making of this, and then it individually ranks all of the animals that appear in the film.
Love it.
It says horses, oxen, birds, tigers, wolves, bears, leopards, deer, fish, snakes. They're all computer generated. And as soon as I read that, nothing had come on the screen except this disclaimer, and I went, oh, I'm going to enjoy this.
So, just to be clear, I had obviously seen this film before because I'd put it forward. Mr. Brown, you had no idea what you were going in for?
No, so you had mentioned it to me briefly when you first saw it, and I had completely forgotten it. So a couple of things came to me as I was watching it, but even when you did explain to me what the film was about, you gave a general explanation of it. So I had no idea what I was in for.
I had also sent you the dance sequence as well of Naatu Naatu, yeah?
That's true. That's true.
But just by itself. And so that it just came across as like a music video when I sent it to you.
Yes.
Yeah. So you had no kind of idea of what the narrative of this film was going to be.
No, and I'm not sure if I could succinctly put the narrative into a Reader's Digest version for anyone, because it is so bizarre at times.
Well, for me, it comes down to one word: bromance.
Oh, for sure.
So that for me, that's what it's about. It's a bromance for sure. It's a movie about friendship and loyalty and all the things that come with that kind of purity of friendship. So and that is a big draw card for me. I am always a fan of a film that really romantic movies as well are nice, but like when it's just more focused on companionship and being like good friends to someone, I will always be in for that kind of film.
It feels very, very sincere, and even though there are some really exaggerated moments in the film, it all feels very grounded because of that heart element.
A film so hyper fantastical in so many ways, I could be easily dissuaded from watching a film like this. But when it was all grounded in that human element of, friendship and loyalty and like looking out for one's people and stuff, I'm all about it.
Yeah. Did you notice that the film started with credits, just plain credits on a black screen, which is what we were talking about maybe last week or the week before.
Yes.
But I wasn't bored because the music was so catchy.
Yeah, the music in this film in general is just astounding. After I first watched it, I went and got the soundtrack on Apple Music, and I play it on a regular basis while I'm doing my house cleaning. I love the soundtrack of this movie.
We kick things off with the British governor and his wife abducting Marley. His wife, Alison Doody.
Yes. So we have previously mentioned on the podcast the 6 degrees of separation or 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. This one was very easy for us to link from a previously talked about film in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Because Alison Doody is...
Now, I could only link it because you mentioned it in advance.
Yes.
I think she looks very, very different.
Well, we are talking 30 years on, and she does certainly look different. And the role she plays in this movie, I mean, it's a main cast role, but it's not the same role or a similar role to what she played in Indiana Jones.
Well, except for the fact that she was a Nazi in Indiana Jones, and she's also heavily racist.
Yeah, yes, this is true.
She's been typecast.
Yeah, that's right. The film in general, like at the start, has the energy of an epic. Even in the intro credits that you talked about, like you just get the feel of, we're going into Lawrence of Arabia style in terms of how big a film we're about to watch. And then that opening scene, like kind of setting a complication in terms of the
abduction.
Yeah, the abduction.
So epic. Yeah. Like everything goes into slow motion, and they keep talking, but they're talking in slow motion as well. And I really liked the fact that there's another character there. I don't think he has a very prominent role in the rest of the film, but in this moment, he sort of is there to explain what's going on.
Yes.
And it doesn't feel ridiculous that he's explaining, because obviously there's a lot of language barriers between this colony and the British people who are taking Marley away. And he's like, I think they're paying you for the song that she sung.
Oh, you're talking about the one who was sitting next to the mother.
Yeah, and then as she gets taken away, he's like, it's not for the song. They're taking her. Anything looks good in slow motion. But when you also have a scene that would have played really well regularly and then put it in slow motion, it makes it, like, it gives you chills.
And this is just one of a million points within the movie where stylization within the editing and the way that the filming's done is just extreme. Yeah.
Also, it showed you right from the get-go that they weren't messing around with this film.
No.
Like when the mother chases after them and then he gets the piece of wood and hits her. Like, that's full on.
Yeah.
That's really, really full on. And he gives that big spiel about the worth of the bullets.
Yes, which comes back again a few times later. I think this, I'm making assumptions here, but culturally, I think Indian films have a bit more variety in how they are willing to have violence depiction contribute to a narrative, even though it's graphic in nature. And we see this throughout the film. The subtle difference in terms of what you'd expect from a standard Western film, telling a similar story to this, to the way that this film is made. That piece of wood over the head, that is the first kind of sign of that to me. Yeah.
Because of the narrative device behind it, to me it meant a lot more. Anytime I saw like a action sequence, and I mean there's heaps of them throughout the film that are quite extended. And I really like action, but if a sequence goes for a really, really long time and you're just seeing the same thing over and over, then it becomes quite tiresome. But because there were such high stakes in this film, and you really cared about the characters, there wasn't a single moment through any of the action sequences where it felt tedious.
I wholeheartely agree, and I'm glad to hear it. This is the first of maybe a few reliefs of, like, I hope Mr. Brown can see what I saw in this film. Moving on from that scene and then maybe talking about that, the next scene is where I really locked in with going, okay, I think I'm gonna like this film.
This after the fire comes up.
After the fire comes up and they're at the jail or the prison, and then it's got the big crowd around, and then where you get introduced to Ram.
Yeah, and I must say that these two scenes back to back, introducing these characters, two of the best introductions to characters I've seen in a film ever.
Yeah, so I still, when I walked away from the movie the first time and then for a while, like, reflected onto it, this scene, the one with Ram going and getting the guy who threw what did he throw over the fence? And he throws something.
But it smashes.
Yeah, so Ram decides to prove his ability and goes and nabs this guy from the crowd. This is a scene that I still reflect back on as being my favourite scene because of the way it convinced me that the film is going to be awesome. And the way he uses the crowd work as well, like that, like we often see films where crowds look very CGI because they're, in terms of getting enough extras. And maybe this film did use CGI for the extras, but when it does the epic shots, it looks sincere to me. And then the work of Ram within the crowd, when he jumps over the fence and starts trying to get the guy, I believed it.
Yeah, and so combination of both. They had quite a large crowd of extras and then used CGI for extension of that.
Yeah.
And so that's a pretty common technique, but I think the thing that sells it so well in this film is the amount of extras that they had. So already it was quite a sizable crowd. Mm-hmm. So any of the things that are interacting with him are real. Mm-hmm. And even when they're just shaking the fence in the extreme wide shot, that's all real. But then maybe 10 rows back, then they're all CGI for it to be like a massive crowd.
Yeah.
And so obviously that really sells it because you're looking at a certain point in the film. So the CGI characters aren't even where your eyes are looking. Mm. It's just to give you that bigger context. But the other thing that sells it so well is how it's shot. And a really clever thing that they do, especially when he starts to get kind of overpowered by them and he's at a lower level, they do sort of tiers of people.
Yes.
And so because they do that, it gives you this illusion that the people stretch on forever and ever. And so right in the background, you can see like a flag waving or something and you're like, oh, well, then the crowd must be everywhere.
Yeah, yeah.
So they have some really clever tricks along the way.
Very clever. Obviously, then Ram goes into the crowd and grabs the guy. And we get an indication as to how these characters are going to be depicted as somewhat superheroes. There's certainly an element of superhuman powers within these individuals.
Well, this is really interesting because I think throughout the entire film, they seem superhuman. Mm. But in this scene, despite the fact that he's doing something that is insane, he's overpowering this.
He loves a bit of parkour.
He does love a bit of parkour. But this scene, more than any other scene in the film, felt believable.
Yes. You
felt like, yeah, maybe he could do this. Like, he is getting overpowered at times, but then it's like, well, he's only taking one out at a time. Like, it felt, even though it is this spectacular situation, the reason it drew me in so much was because you were like, well, it's somewhat real.
Yeah, as opposed to when we meet Beam next, which is like a little less
exactly
possible,
right.
Yeah.
But I think this scene does so well is the cutbacks to the British Army watching.
Yes.
And especially like the superior officer who's like, good God.
I love the depiction of the Englishman in general.
For
it's
sure.
very much like catering to that they're the antagonist as a whole. Yeah.
But yeah, so well done. So yes, we're introduced to the fire, and then we get the water afterwards, which is obviously a common theme throughout the film. And I like that they're always associated with these. Like every time they fight, there's elements of that.
Yeah.
And we'll get to that as each of the scenes come. But when we're first introduced to Beam, the first thing we see is his reflection.
Yes.
We assume it's him, but it's his reflection in the water.
And it's so well done as well because I in terms of being orientated and then the switch of that shot, I'm like, oh wow, they did that reflection really well.
So that's a 360 camera move if I can get
it.
Yeah,
you're happy with that one?
I'm happy with that one.
And then obviously we get a very ripped Reem posing and what it's like some black liquid that he's pouring on top of his head. I think it's
blood, isn't it?
Is it blood? Okay.
Because he's trying to attract the wolf.
Oh, of course, yes.
Beam, to me, it takes a long time for him to recapture this look. So right at the start when we're introduced to him, he's shirtless, he's super buff, he's got the nose ring in, his hair's wet, so it's like it's scraggly. And then for a good maybe 2 hours after this, he always looks a lot neater
he's presented as and he's also presented as subservient as well because immediately after this scene, we see him in the city and one of the Englishmen beats him down thinking he got tricked about the motorbike.
Yeah, and he just takes it.
Yeah, that's right, because, it's because he's undercover. Well,
sure.
Yeah.
So, as Akhtar, is that his undercover name?
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, so before we move on to that, though, this scene, it's awesome, right?
Tough guy. I just read tough guy.
Tough guy.
He's just so extreme in how it's like it's one thing to be chased by the wolf, and it's like, oh wait, no, we're going to up the ante.
Yeah. Talk about a rough day. I love that moment too, where he realizes while he's running away from a wolf, oh, there's also a tiger nearby.
Yes.
It's like he's so aware of his surroundings. Yeah. It really shows he's not only physically strong, but he's intelligent. He's really smart. While being chased by a wolf and his life is this close to ending, he can be like, oh, that's Tiger Mark.
It gives the audience an awareness of another power that he has, which is connection with nature.
Yes.
Which comes back to play a part later on as well.
I assume this is a cultural thing too, where animals mean so much in Indian culture that even after he captures them, he apologizes to the tiger for the fact that he's not going to be used for what he should be within the world. Yeah. It's really cool. Just that scene where he's trying to connect the two.
He's bringing the links together. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
Tough guy.
Awesome. Yeah. But yeah, as I said, he immediately in the next scene changes so much in terms of his undercover character that it catches you off guard. I almost have myself questioning, is this a different character altogether? Like he's so different. Yeah. I think a lot of that is physical too. We don't see him without a shirt for the rest of the film. So like he's wearing baggier, loose-fitting clothing. His hair's all curly as opposed to being like matted and messy. Like that physically he changes a lot as well. His nose ring is removed. So yeah, I think they do a really good job of making two tough guys right at the beginning and then stripping them of that fairly quickly.
Yep, and to like make you kind of connect with them more beyond just their physical ability, and it gives the characters more depth for sure.
And so once he does go undercover, Ram is also enlisted to find him and capture him. He knows nothing about him, but he's enlisted to try and protect the British governor.
Yeah, which I love this as a storyline because it allows these two to kind of interweave. The way they meet is we'll get to that in a second. Maybe it's a bit like there's an element of it being kind of forced or like in terms of the storyline, but I love it to bits. I'm not complaining. But in terms of like it's just like the whole idea of them coming together when they're actually opposing like characters in terms of what they're after.
I mean, in the bridge scene, which is I assume is what you're referring to, where the train explodes. The fact that they connect over that is our first hint as an audience to their pure motives.
Yes.
Well, I guess we always know what Beam is doing, but we don't find out a lot about Ram until much later in the film. And so the fact that it's showing as soon as someone's in danger, they're going to be working together, that's their top priority. I think we always feel that Ram is pure at heart, but early on we're like, well, what are his motives? Is he just trying to... He's had a rough upbringing, so he's just trying to do better for himself? Or what's going on?
You bring up such a great point because for me, what they provided us in terms of Ram's motives was enough for me for his likability. I was there with, he did not come across as someone lesser than Bean, but the fact that they give us more later on, structurally, I think it's such a great decision in terms of the film.
100%.
But going back to the bridge scene, I love that through nothing but sign language, they are able to tell each other exactly how they're going to save that little boy. I was just overwhelmed with hurrahs for this one.
Yeah, I mean, a sign language would have done it because it's not like it's a complex plan or anything. The two of them, one on a horse, one on a motorcycle.
Which, like you were talking about with the fire and water, this becomes symbolic to who they are as individuals as well.
Yeah. And again, filters back in the film later on, they also decide motorbike and horse. It always symbolizes that they're on different paths.
Yes.
But they're working towards the same goal.
Yep.
Which is really cool. Yep. I love it. I love how much forethought into this entire plan there is. Like the fact that he grabs the flag because he knows he's going to need that flag in order to wrap himself.
And it's not just any kind of piece of material. It's the Indian flag.
Yeah.
Right? The Indian flag saves Bean through the fire and then waves gloriously while the two men hold hands and pretty much unite literally for the adventures to come.
Yeah, and look, the flag appears in quite a lot throughout the film in terms of these really great moments.
Yeah.
But I love it. I champion it.
Oh, me too. Like national pride. Like it's not something we have to push aside. Like, you know, and that's what this movie's about in many ways is national pride.
Yeah. Which often it does get, because certainly the types of films that I'm consuming are more often than not American films.
Yeah.
It does seem like quite a tired concept to have like American pride within a film.
Yeah.
And so you're like, okay, yeah, whatever. It's really quite refreshing when you see it coming from other countries.
Well, I mean, like, it's not that I have any kind of suggestions or examples that come to mind, but I have Australian pride when a movie is good and it's made and it's an Australian-made film. So there's pride. National pride is everywhere. So yeah, like I certainly. Yeah, I clapped when the Indian flag was kind of brought in as part of like the whole United scene.
You clapped your hand together with someone else's hand who was close by you.
Which happened to be my dog, and she didn't understand what was going on.
You shouldn't have a clue.
Yeah.
Oh, poor Dawn.
And it's at this point that we have the full RRR.
The title, which is how far into the film? Like 40 minutes into the film?
It's at least half an hour, for sure. Yeah.
And I thought the R's were going to come through in the fire, water, and another element. Fire, water, and another element. But yeah, then rise, roar, revolt.
Yes.
It's cool. I really like it. Then we get their bonding montage straight after.
Love this montage. It's so good.
It's so like such a tonal shift from what we've just seen.
And that's what this film's good with as well, is tonal shifts and like giving us a real variety with like the mood. Yeah.
I just some of the things that come up in this sequence too, like everybody loves to bond over stealing a kid's goat. But no, it's great, and this was another great moment of symbolism too. There's a moment where they're both walking on either side of the barbed wire fence.
Yes,
to like show their separate sides, but again walking towards the same thing.
I think there's a bit more horse versus motorbike in this montage as well.
Not even horse versus motorbike. They're just like going. It's almost like a scene where you see two people riding horses on the beach.
Yes,
it's like that through like the field. It's great. It's really great. It's also in this montage where we see it's not just great things of how they're bonding together, but both of them on their separate missions as well gets kind of woven into this montage. And Ram gets the picture made of the person that is working with Beam.
Yes.
He doesn't know they're working together, obviously. But I love how just before he can show it to Beam, the picture gets mysteriously ruined. It gets blown off the motorbike and lands in a puddle.
This one was a bit on the nose for me, a tiny bit. It's like they've been friends now, like assumedly for a little while. Surely Beam would have said to Ram, so what is it that you're trying to do? And Ram would have gone, I'm trying to get this guy. And like he waits until he's on a motorbike and the wind's flailing his like piece of paper and like it's like, oh.
No, it's fine because at that point in the film he goes, yeah, why haven't I asked you yet? Before he shows it. So the writers have it sorted.
Now, it's at the same scene, I believe, that we meet Beam's love interest.
Yes. But I don't even know her name. I want to say it's Elizabeth because that's the most British name.
I've also forgotten that whole joke where the translation thing gives...
Oh, yeah.
So it was just Jenny.
Just Jenny, of course.
Yeah. So it's Jenny, yeah.
I didn't mind that joke, though.
I like that joke a lot because Ram was able to translate for Beam and like it made Ram kind of useful. You didn't have to put Ram aside. He had a purpose for being involved in the meet cute. Yeah.
I really like the language barrier as a joke. I don't know that it works as well when most of the conversation they have with each other is essentially followed by, I don't know what you're saying, or I wish I could understand what you're saying. It doesn't really make you believe their love story so much.
Well, I think if we had watched the original where there was two different languages as well, maybe, but when it's all in English, it's like, I don't understand what you're saying. Like, we understood as the audience, both. Anyway. But I found this delightful as well. The whole meet and Ram's plan with the pins on the ground and
yeah. destroy her car.
Yep.
That's the only way to meet women. Right? But they go to the market. He makes the bangle.
Yes.
Now, I'm not sure, is this like maybe you know more about it, is this kind of like their tribal symbols on the bangle? What has he done to the bangle that instantly puts Marley in a happy state when she receives it?
Well, because the bangle was pre-made, so it's not like he put any actual symbols on it. So my assumption from
he makes it.
Yeah, he does make it, but like it was already like he didn't also etch into.
Oh, okay.
Like, so he shapes it, and so it's. I got the impression it's more just about the shape is some kind of symbolism to Marley that it's from her. People.
Right.
Yeah. You're right. It is a bit vague, but it was enough for me to kind of go, oh, yeah, she gets it. Yep.
And so after they spend a bit of time together, he goes back. Ram tells her that the real name, just Jenny.
Yes.
Well, not just Jenny. Jenny.
Yes.
That's her name.
That's right.
And then they instantly go to a party. So they get suited up and they head to a party.
Surely anyone who's watched this film considers it a highlight because of so last year with the Academy Awards, this song got nominated for Best Original Song for a Film, and for me, it should have won. This is, of course, Naatu Naatu.
Yes, and they start talking about dancing very early on once they get to the party. And knowing anything about Tollywood, anything about Bollywood, as soon as they mentioned that there was dancing at this party, I was like, oh, here we go. I'm ready.
So is this the first musical number at all through the film? Marley's done a bit of singing.
Yeah. So I think this might be, besides the end credit song, there's lots of singing throughout the film, but I think this is one of the few. But
and like a song that's included as part of the narrative.
I mean, I haven't seen a lot of Bollywood stuff. I'd never seen any Tollywood stuff, and usually when it comes in, it doesn't fit as seamlessly. Let's be honest, it does pull you a little bit out of the narrative. It's a whole sequence devoted to this, but usually it's just like, we want to do a dance number now, so we're going to put a dance number in.
Yeah.
Whereas they worked this into the narrative a lot better, which I think is why RRR works so well, because I think it's almost like a bridging of a certain culture of film, but also they're like, but look, we're making it slightly more accessible by linking it more to narrative. So I love this sequence. I was watching it by myself at the time and had to stop the scene just so that I could tell my partner to watch this scene with me and take it back.
So much fun. Like the setup of it as well, with the Englishman kind of challenging with all those the tango and the flamenco.
And again, like, it's such a ridiculous villain.
Yeah.
So over the top. And he's not even, like, in terms of the main villain of the film, he's a mere speck, but he is so exaggerated in how evil he is in this one sequence where he's like, you can't do this dance.
I love that he calls them wankers as well. I love that in terms of an Indian script, they'll go, how English can we make this guy? What kind of insult would an Englishman say? He'll call them wankers. Yeah. Yes.
Just that was the height of insulting them.
Yes.
Can you flamenco? Then, of course, Ram comes in and saves the day. When he picks up the tray and then starts playing it on the drum kit, I love it. I love it so much. And he just walks in and he's like, we can't do any of that, but we can do this.
And, we think it's going to be a little bit better.
And they're right.
Yes.
It's more than a little bit better. The entire party gets around this dance.
As they should.
For sure.
Because it's damn impressive.
My favorite parts in this sequence, though, I mean, the dance is amazing, the song is amazing, but just whenever it cuts to other characters and they're just like nodding in approval, but in time with the music.
Yep.
So good.
But I love the dust kicking up when they're kind of challenging at the end of the editing on this. And
it's got that pulsing artificial zoom at times.
Yes,
yeah.
The colourful costume as well. Like, just every single element that's put into this scene is contributing to a fun fest. Yeah.
And as it does happen when you dance that hard, he gets a cramp.
Yes.
But
lucky Ram said it just carrying on his back.
That's true, but a bit of foreshadowing there. Carrying him on his back when you get a cramp. Yeah. But I did find it interesting that he can take on a wolf and a tiger, barely breaking a sweat, but then he gets a cramp from it.
Well, I mean, that dance, though, that's pretty impressive dancing. Yeah.
It is. We need to crack that out at a party. The next note I've got is when Ram is poisoned.
Yes.
He comes back and we see the whole plan that Beam has put forward is derailed. He's like, well, you guys go through with that. I need to take care of my friend. Which is, again, coming back to this idea of they both had their own goals that they needed to achieve and how each of those get compromised by the other one throughout.
Yes, absolutely. And this is such a beautifully structured midpoint of the film where the conflict is risen in terms of our two protagonists being against each other. So the realization that comes within this scene through Ram getting poisoned, Beam, he gets that whole plan laid out, and then he nearly just walks away, and then he's like, wait a second, my Ram senses are tingling. I'm going to go back to this alleyway. Oh, there's Ram, and he needs my help with the snake bite. And then that through Beam telling Ram on the bed what's going to happen, Ram comes to the realization. And this was always coming, elevated switch of tension and conflict. Yeah.
It obviously culminates in the break-in where all of the animals are released.
So we spoke about this a few times for a few movies about these peaks and troughs and in ways that action films are structured. But what this film does so well, I think, is makes a scene that's relevant to the narrative still go within itself is just so much fun and action-packed that the scenes are memorable as isolated points within the film, along with being part of the overall narrative.
And this feels like the finale of a film. I mean, if you look at the runtime of the film, it probably could have been the finale of the
so
film.
We haven't spoken about this yet.
It is a long film. It's 3 hours and
5 minutes.
And 5 minutes.
Yep.
But I didn't feel the length of it. I did have moments where I was like, oh, this is the finale. And then, oh, hang on, it's like got 2 hours to go or an hour and a half to go. I don't even think we were at the halfway point at this moment, even though it felt like a finale.
So I checked. So the break-in scene is pretty much right at the halfway point.
Okay.
Yeah. So
which is really interesting because you go, well, that almost felt like an isolated film in itself.
Yeah.
But they can't actually wrap up the narrative in terms of making them see eye to eye because at this point, we as an audience think the narrative is far simpler than it is.
Yes.
But we haven't even got any of Ram's backstory.
That's right.
So it's kind of like the first half of the film is Beam's story, and then the second half is Ram's.
First, let's talk about this scene because these, like you said, they're CGI animals, but it does not matter. It does not matter in the slightest. This scene is huge. Epic proportion of action. Everything you could possibly want in an action film is within this scene.
Well, when is it a leopard or it's some sort of big cat lands on him and he just flings it off him onto another guard?
Yes.
So awesome.
And then he also throws a motorbike at someone else. The superhuman element really comes to the fore in this scene, I think. We've already seen it in other stuff, but it's at this point where we go, okay, so clearly it's not meant to be close to realistic in terms of its depiction of anything that's going on. And I'm all for that.
As was I. I think maybe one of the most satisfying moments for me was to see that guard who'd just been a bit of an asshole the whole time. The one with the key?
Yeah, and then he gets his arm caught on the antlers.
Good. Just like through the buck's antlers and
Yeah, and then it's at this point that both Ram and Beam realise that they're against each other for what their purposes are. And so we see the fire and water come into play.
These shots are awesome. I think the fire shot's better.
Yes.
The water one's a little quirky because...
Using the hoses?
Yeah. Still really cool, but the fire shot...
Yeah.
I mean, you probably already noted this, but if you go back and you actually watch where all the fireworks are behind Ram... They've framed him in a halo and it's just so carefully done.
Yep.
It looks badass.
Yep.
It looks so cool
Yep.
before they actually fight using those means,
Yep.
which is really cool. And I mean, it's not just moments throughout the film where they're fire and water. The whole time. I mean, Ram enters the scene in a car that's already on fire.
Yes.
And then just flips it and casually just walks next to it. It's so cool. So cool.
Too much fun.
But this was the first time that Beam captured the ferocity of his first introduction. When he sees the key go down the drain, and he just, something in him snaps.
Yes.
And he just, that was so cool.
Well, yeah, he's obviously been endeavoring to save Marley this whole time, but it's at this point where he's so close and his goal is within reach, and then Ram stuffs it up for him that he does switch on to that next level of energy. Yeah.
They do end up separating slightly, and he ends up climbing the building.
Yep.
This was probably the first time that I thought the CGI sets looked a bit funny, and it's only because we see him running on top of it.
You're talking about that extreme wide and he's running across the building. It does look a bit cartoonish.
A bit PlayStation 2 cutscene.
Yes,
and that's usually the only thing that kind of gives it away. I mean, you can tell when a set is CGI, but for the most part, if it looks cool, you're like, yeah, whatever. But when you see a human, because we're so used to seeing humans all the time and how they move, it's so much more identifiable as, oh, that's CGI, because they're a little too fluid. It's like Gumby running across a rooftop.
That's a really good point that I hadn't really articulated before, that, it's when it's humans that are CGI that it's more noticeable. Right, yeah.
I didn't know who I wanted to win, which is really interesting because you would think that Beam is the far more obvious choice of someone that you should be getting behind because you know his backstory more. But something about how they introduce Ram makes him very sympathetic even before they give that backstory.
Ram hasn't achieved his recognition as a general or something like that at the start, so that's why he punches a hole in the punching bag.
Yes. Very cool.
Yeah. It's at this point where you could, as an audience member, start erring towards more, we want Beam to win.
Yeah, even could, probably should.
Yeah, that's right.
Because we know more about his backstory and his motives.
And then the director just goes, hang on a second, let's just make you more conflicted as a viewer as to who you want to root for, because Ram has this backstory as well.
This is another one of my favourite scenes. I was going to do a little game with you at the end of this where I said 3 or 4 of my favourite scenes and got you to pick which my favourite one was. But I don't know that I could narrow it down to 3 or 4. There are so many great sequences throughout this film. But this one in particular, because it feels very different to a lot of the other sequences. Again, another tonal shift. But even the way that it's shot, everything has been so vibrant and highly saturated throughout the film. And then this has all the colour washed out of it.
Yep.
So, yeah, you really feel for all of the characters, but you feel really brought into the sequence. So you see all of them training in the tribe, and you don't quite understand the importance of it until, of course, they are attacked. And the attack is epic. So Ram's dad fighting, so cool.
Yep.
When the first shot he lets off and it goes through the guy talking through the megaphone.
Yes.
I love it. I love it so much. And this is the first time we see someone jump over something and while they're midair, take out their rifle and shoot someone down. The stylized stuff in this film is just so well thought out and choreographed. I can't tear myself away. I'm so engaged in sequences like this.
Yeah, and I made the note that I don't mind that the CGI can be a little bit tacky. I don't mind that sense of superhuman element that comes across with all of this stuff. You're so immersed in the scene, but you're also rooting for the characters. Everything is so well constructed and kind of works so well together when you have characters that are doing things like what the father's doing. You're on board. Yeah.
It gives you not even just a glimpse into Ram's motives, but also how quickly he had to grow up. So like as a kid, he's already in training, but then by the end of this sequence, he has to shoot his own father, the dynamite on his back.
Yes.
Like, it's just like, this is your cause now. This is what you're working towards. Like, it's insane.
Now, we also meet a young version of Ram's wife, Sita, who as a character is quite important, and she plays a more important role later on in the film as well. So I like that we have Sita as a secondary character within these scenes as well, because it gives her more depth and more importance as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
After this flashback sequence, we go back to the present, and Beam's been captured, and they do the big spectacle, the whipping sequence.
Yeah, great song scene as well here. But yeah, absolutely, the spectacle and that kind of revolutionary element to it as well in the crowd getting on side with...
Feels very Les Mis.
Yes, oh yeah, for sure. Like that mix of the violence and the graphic nature of it, like the whip with the pins on it.
Not even the violence. Sometimes the implied violence. Like there's a section where he's being whipped and all you see is the governor's eyes wincing every time you hear the crack. And it's just such a great shot.
Yep.
They are fantastic in this scene. When Alison takes out
Which isn't the character's name, but we're going to refer to it as that. Yeah,
I didn't note down the character's name, so we have to call her
We're
Alison.
calling her Duty. Yeah.
When she takes out the whip with the spikes and then like her husband's like, "Ooh, you're even more vicious than I thought." Like whatever he says, it's just they take so much joy. They revel in how vicious it is.
Yeah, and like that whole "he's not kneeling" thing that she goes on and on about. Like she's arguably more vicious than the guy.
Well, certainly in this scene, later on he says some super vicious stuff.
That's
when
true.
He's looking at Ram in the cage, but. It is so epic. The song, the fact that every time they pull him back, he refuses to let his knees touch the ground. Like, I loved this sequence too. Hence why I said it'd be so hard to pick a favorite.
Yeah, it's a good one. And then because Ram doesn't succeed, he gets jailed.
Yes.
Oh no, I'm jumping ahead here.
Oh well, no, he basically goes. He suggests that they hang him.
Yes.
And then he sets up the tree trap, but the governor spots it, and while the car's flipping,
the governor coming out. Yeah, so like to your point, this scene is one of my favorites as well because there's so much complexity going on with Ram has set it up so the bullets aren't going to work in the guns. He sets up that tree.
Yeah.
The
car flip is
the car flip is great. I just it's almost comical, but I am all for it.
Well, I think. In some ways, it almost is supposed to be.
Yeah.
Like, you need some sort of levity, because otherwise it's an intense narrative.
That's true.
And then we get this scene where, because Beam doesn't know, Ram is shooting to defend Marley, but Beam thinks that he's shooting at Marley. He ends up, like, knocking him down, and then he raises the stake above his head and slams it down in the ground.
Yep.
For a second, I was like, has he just killed him?
Mm-hmm.
Like I did genuinely think it, which of course you're meant to, but if you look at the runtime of the film, you should probably figure out that that's not the way it's going to go.
Yes, and like you'd been duped before as well. So
that's true.
Then Ram is imprisoned because it's revealed that he was helping Beam.
Again, this is obviously a choice to go for style over reality, but he hasn't been fed, or he's been fed like once a week since he's been in there.
But he's been working out.
But he's ripped. He's ripped.
Yeah.
That's not quite how muscles work, but...
I just looked it's the equivalent of Linda Hamilton in Terminator 2 for me, like where she's been working out in the mental institution.
Yeah, but they feed you in the mental institution.
That's true, yeah.
And then they move him to solitary confinement, and as soon as he's in there, he starts doing the pull-ups again.
Yes, yep.
So good.
Yep. So I did make the note, like the one criticism for me was at this point in the film, I did kind of start feeling tiresome with the story. It's all important, and I was struggling to think of anything that could be cut. Beam meeting Suni, and Beam realizing who Ram is, and and then so Beam's like, well, I'll now go save Ram. It's all important, but at this point, because that's pretty much the end of the second act of the film, kind of setting up for the final stuff. I was growing a little bit weary of the storyline at that point.
Yeah, well, as I said, the animal fight early on felt like a false ending.
Yeah,
you feel that again after Beam and Marley run off into the forest.
Yes,
so it does have a few almost fake out endings. But as I said, even though you feel that way at the time, once it kind of kicks in again, you go, all right, no, I'm ready to keep watching. Let's go for it.
And it's certainly after this, like when it is decided that Beam is going to go and save Ram, it does switch back on for me, and it's all systems go.
Yeah, and this sequence too, like obviously the fact that Ram's been in solitary confinement, his legs have atrophied.
Yes.
And so he has to go on Beam's shoulders.
Yes.
Of course, because his legs don't work. It felt very much like Rakakuni. The facial expression you're giving me is like, it's exactly what I was thinking.
As soon as it happened, I'm like, all right, so this is like, for me, like, it's certainly not a nod to Everything Everywhere All at Once, but it did certainly remind me of Raccoonie.
They do this sequence for a bit, and then they're like, no, we want to put Ram back on his legs. I know, we'll just get Beam to put something on his legs, and then his legs will be fighting. Because we need them to be fighting side by side.
But prior to that, like the whole running around of the two of them together, and like
climbing the tower and flipping.
Yes, yep. So with the guns and all of it is so much fun. But what I also loved about this point in the film, because they've switched up the way that both characters. Well, Beam's about the same, but like Ram is certainly like more. He's meant to be disheveled, but he actually looks like great with the beard and the long hair.
Well, it's interesting though, because it doesn't feel like much time has passed, but you got to assume quite a bit has if he's looking like that, right?
Yeah, well, at least a few months, assumedly. The kind of the timeline this film runs on, there's some points it's like, wait, how long ago was this and how long since that one? But it doesn't really impact too greatly.
No.
So the way that these scenes work, and more so when they then go into the forest, the colouring of these scenes, like because it's at night, so it's all very blue. Like it's meant to be a lot of like a moonlight replicant in terms of the lighting, but it works in terms of setting a particular mood to the event.
And I mean, it starts off blue, but then of course it becomes reds and oranges once Ram gets his hands on a fiery bow and arrow. So yet again, Beam ends up in the water.
Yes.
He's taking the drink of water, and then the arrow comes through his drink of water. We get the fire and water juxtaposition again.
But because that's when so Beam had put the stuff on Ram's legs and left him and going, I'll just go get some water, mate. You sit tight. And then Ram gets the water. He's about to be attacked by the Englishman. And then the arrow comes through.
Yeah.
I just love every single second of this scene, because then the Englishmen go, light him up. So they've got the big spotlights, but the first one's behind Ram. So he just comes into this silhouette and he just looks awesome. So good.
Yeah. Oh, man. But this sequence is so cool. I mean, never mind the fact that his arrows go on forever.
Yes.
He's got a billion.
The ones that he stole from the statue.
The statue, which of course it would have thousands and thousands in there. But I just love the way that this scene plays out. That's the other great thing about all these action sequences. They always are different. Like this is far more unique because he's using arrows instead of the guns that he was using before.
Yes.
A lot of the times he's retrieving arrows that he's shot. But I think my favorite part was when he shoots the arrow through the tree and it stops just in front of one of the soldiers' eyes. And you're like, oh, this soldier's alive. And then he turns to the side and just kicks it into his ear. So good. Oh, man. But this is a great, great sequence. And obviously it then comes together with them blowing up the governor's home.
Yep.
And yeah, everything kind of wraps up quite neatly and quickly.
Iteration on quickly. Like, this is not the typical kind of amount of time that they spend wallowing in the resolution that they would in a Western film, I'd say. Like, they kill the governor and his wife, and then it's like, bang, all right, let's get out of this scene straight away. There's no talking to each other at the scene. I just did not expect to leave that scene so quickly.
Well, I think in a film that does go for over 3 hours, they are very strategic about what they're deciding they should be placing importance on and what they don't necessarily think they should. And I think it still has that epic finish to the action sequence with the callback to the value of the bullet. It still has less about hanging around on sight after the action sequence and more about, well, what are the characters doing now that they're moving on?
Yeah, so for me, like, I feel like it's an assumed cultural difference where a Western film would want to revel in the conquer and, like, you know, really just have a few more cuts and a few more, like even a minute or two more, where you're still at the scene where the heroes have won. Whereas this film decides to go, all right, let's quickly move on from that to a scene where we still get to hang with the heroes and hear about, you know, what's going to happen next. But it's a much sunnier, happier, light-hearted kind of scene.
Yeah, we get to hypothesize about the longevity of Beam and Jenny's relationship.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And then we cut to a song.
We do cut to a song, which again is an
Another
iconic thing from the credits of Indian films. You look at Slumdog Millionaire, and they have that in the credit sequence.
Yes,
and it's just like the film had no reference to music tonally throughout it at all, but then it just gets the credit. It's like, this is just what we do.
Yeah, because I think the audience want, like, an audience expectation is that you get to leave the film, especially with, I don't know how much you deep dive into researching this one. Did you watch any of the audience reactions on YouTube to this film in the cinema?
No, I didn't.
That's something to watch. Like, there is some stuff where in Indian cinemas where people are like letting out confetti at the end.
Wow.
And they're dancing in the aisles. Like, so this film is the most expensive Indian film ever made. And that's saying something, because the Bollywood and Tollywood are huge, huge industries. But this one takes the cake in terms of the most expensive film. It was the most anticipated film. It was actually made and ready to go for when COVID hit. So they've sat on this for 2 years, or it was pretty close, I think. They had an initial release date of 2020, and then they held off because of COVID, because they knew what they had. And
I think that was a very wise decision.
Very, very wise.
And as I said, I think this will really draw in people that hadn't really considered this form of cinema before. Mm-hmm. I think it's a really, really good bridging film.
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree. I think this film will really kind of change the way people approach world cinema.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming you're a fan.
I think it's a pretty safe assumption. Do you want me to play this game with you where I tell you 3 of my favorite scenes and you try and guess which one?
Yeah, that'll be fun. Yeah.
All right. So, first up, it's the introduction to Ram, where he goes through the crowd and fights everyone. Next, the dance sequence. Mm-hmm. And then third, it would have to be the animal release, the whole fight.
3 amazing scenes. So these 3 would certainly, if I was listing out my favorite ones that like are memorable, it'd be those 3 plus the ending probably would be the 4 that I'd have in my top 4. So that makes it really hard for me to work out which one you would have liked the most. I'm going to guess, and this is just because of sitting across from you for this whole podcast, probably, and the response to Naatu Naatu. Is Naatu Naatu the winner?
Yes, yes it is. Yeah. But I will say, even discussing this today, talking about the intro to Ram's character and like reliving it in my head, well, not living it, but rewatching it in my head, that was a very close second. It's such a great sequence. Yeah. So,
and I'd say I would agree probably that they're my top 2. But this whole film is just an absolute delight.
It is.
I'm glad that you're on board for it. I really hope that a few of our students or people around the school are on board for it as well, because I think it's an absolute win.
Yeah, and I hopefully, if people watch it for no other reason than to go, oh, they're going to talk about it, I'll give it a watch, then I think they'll be very pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, I was certainly surprised. I don't even know how. I think it just, the Netflix algorithm recommended it to me randomly. I'm like, these days where you know a lot going into a film, whereas this one I had no idea, and I was glad for it.
Yeah, I was the exact same way. We were so enthusiastic about this that we are running a little long in our main segment, so should we progress forward to our weekly watches? Mm-hmm. I know you've had a full week in terms of the amount of films that you've watched, so I'll let you start us off.
Sure, so I'll whip through these pretty quickly. The first one for me was an Australian film called Heaven Tonight, a very, very young Guy Pearce.
Okay.
But the main actor is John Waters, who you may know as well. He's done a bit of stuff, straight-to-TV film. The reason I watch this film is because it actually got a run-through on another film podcast that I listened to called the Footscray Film Club. And they just watch exclusively Australian films, and they were talking about this one. So I'm trying to work through and watch all these left-of-centre Australian films before I listen to the podcast, much like I hope that people do for our podcast. This film was not great, though. This film was pretty terrible. So it was real schlocky kind of drama, and I enjoyed watching it, but I don't I wouldn't say it's good. Next film I watched was John Wick 3.
We knew it was coming.
Yeah, so I am working through them. This one was certainly an improvement on John Wick 2. I did enjoy it more than John Wick 2. It still had a lot of story going on with it compared to the first John Wick, which I liked the simplicity of the first John Wick. But obviously they'd really set up the world in John Wick 2 that he was going to work within. I did like that it went straight in from the ending of John Wick 2 into this third one and just kept running with the pace and the energy. Yeah. What did you watch?
So my only film for the week was What Dreams May Come, a Robin Williams film.
Oh, I've never seen that one.
I hadn't either. So I've seen most of Robin Williams' catalogue, but this was one that I think Luke at school suggested to me. I wasn't a huge fan. I think great performances throughout the film, but it is a dramatic film. Tonally it's a little ambiguous as well. It's an exploration of the afterlife. And I think that it keeps kind of shifting in terms of what it's trying to say or the message it's trying to put across. As I said, great performances from the cast, and I think that really helped with my enjoyment of it. But I don't think it's a film that I would return to. It's very kind of like spiritual and like it depends on kind of, I guess, your own personal philosophies or what your what you want to get from that idea of the afterlife. But the idea of family and the fact that even families that seem really quite happy have flaws and there's always going to be issues that they face, I think that was really well executed.
Right.
But yeah, as I said, it was an okay film. I certainly wouldn't refer to it as a bad film, but I don't think it's one I would go back to.
I'm going to say the same for the next two that I'm going to talk about, which is the Meyerowitz stories. You've probably seen that.
Is it Meyer or Merowitz?
The way it's spelled, I'm just reading it phonetically. But
it's like the Jewish family.
Yeah. So Merowitz stories. Yeah. So it's Dustin Hoffman, Adam Sandler, like Ben Stiller, and on paper, this film, because it's directed and written by Noah Baumbach, who I love, and it was just a blind spot for me, and I watched it and enjoyed it, but it's certainly not his best work in terms of the family dynamics. He explores that a lot throughout his films, and this one was okay, but not as strong as, say, Marriage Story or The White Noise, the recent one that he released. I really liked that. The other one I watched was Land of Steady Habits. This was the one where, as I was watching it, I messaged you and said it's really hard to take Ben Mendelsohn seriously in a film.
G'day, boys. You haven't been talking to cops, have you?
Which is a running joke whenever we talk about Ben Mendelsohn now because of what Arnie Donner's put forward, which we'll get to talking about Arnie Donner in a later podcast, I think. But yeah, Land of Steady Habits is a film that I watched starring Ben Mendelsohn, and it was fine, but it was pretty bland as well. Looking at the human condition kind of dramas, nothing really epic going on in them. Certainly wouldn't rewatch. Just to cap off the 5 that I watched, I went back because it's the 25th anniversary of one of definitely my top 3 favorite films of all time, The Big Lebowski, The Dude Abides. This film I've watched this film way too many times. But the opening sequence, like before anything happens and the music starts and we see the tumbleweed roll, the smile on my face just grows so big. And it does not leave for the 2-hour runtime. I love this film. End to end, moment to moment. There is nothing wrong with this film. I think this is a perfect film. I love this film so much. And the way the characters are developed and the way that a lot of what is said, like kind of repeated over, like I just love that little nuance of the writing. But there's so much in this film. I could talk about this film for 2 to 3 hours on a separate podcast, and maybe we will one day, but yeah, I'll move on. But because it was the 25th anniversary of this film, I decided to sit down and watch it again.
Oh, and I mean, I love this segment as an excuse to go back and watch some of our favorites.
Yep.
I watched 2 TV series this week. The first was Succession, which I think I mentioned before. It's sort of like a big family business. When I mentioned on the podcast previously, I was only 1 episode in. Now I'm into season 2, and it spirals out of control. Like, I love how dysfunctional the family is because the business comes first as opposed to their family values, and how they're so competitive as a family. It's really interesting because, and I was discussing this with a friend of mine, the fact that the characters are not great people. Like they're all terrible people, but they're captivating to watch, and they still have redeeming qualities. You feel sympathetic towards them no matter what they do, which is, I find it really interesting as a character study.
It's so funny you bring this film up, the show up, because I was talking to someone at our school, Mr. Nichols, about, and he has been watching this show and was recommending it to me. And I said, well, I watched the first episode and there was nothing I liked about the characters. And he's like, but that's the point.
Yeah.
He goes, he'll watch a couple of episodes and go, why am I watching this? These characters are despicable. And then there'll be an episode where something happens or the characters reveal something and he's like, oh, that's why I like this show. Yeah. So it's something I might go back to.
Yeah. You've got a TV show you're watching?
So I quickly, so we finished up the term on the Thursday, and then on the Friday, Netflix released the 10-episode miniseries Beef, which stars Ali Wong and Stephen Ewan, and I had it finished by the Monday, so I thought this show was fantastic. The first few episodes are fun and engaging, and then as the episodes go on, it just gets deeper and darker and more complex in the humanity it shows and the connections that the two characters have, but also the secondary characters. I had a great conversation with Javier about this show, one of our students and friends of the podcast, because he was also a fan, and we just had, there's so much going on in this show. I really, really cannot recommend it enough. Hope you check it out.
I hadn't heard much about it, and so even the fact that it comes so highly recommended from you is more fuel in terms of getting me to go see it.
Yep.
My final weekly watch was The Last of Us, which I know you've seen, so we can have a good chat. I binged this in a day. I had tried to watch the very first episode previously. I watched the intro section where they explain the fungus. I really loved that opening, and then once it actually went into the world and the explanation of how it all broke out, I realized I wasn't in the right mindset to watch it. I felt like something with a bit more levity. So I returned to it over the last week, and as I said, I couldn't stop watching. I ended up watching all of it in a row because I was that captivated by it.
Oh, great.
I think it might be my favorite, and I've seen a lot of this. I think it might be my favorite depiction of sort of zombie media.
But is it zombies?
Wow.
Have you ever, so after this, because we, at our school, we do that unit of study in Year 11 media where, and I said to the other Year 11 media teacher, I'd love to watch this show. And she said, yeah, but is it zombies? And there's actually articles out there where the creator of the show and the creator of the game has steadfastly said they're not zombies. And I disagree with him, but as he's the creator of the product. So what are your thoughts on that, just quickly?
Well, what's the categorization? I mean, the zombies is like the undead, right?
That's right, but because they're not actually functioning as humans, they're just basically lifeless bodies that are being moved by a disease, like the fungus. It's I don't know. I like I said, I would say that they're zombies.
Generally, so would I. Perhaps there's a technicality that I'm missing, but generally,
I'll send you the article and you'll be interested. Yeah.
But in terms of like post-apocalyptic world, I mean, obviously, I look at something like Zombieland, that's very comedic. You look at The Walking Dead, that has a very similar tone to this show. 28 Days Later was always ranked quite high on my list of post-apocalyptic worlds. But for me, this just had everything I wanted. And I like that there is a healthy dose of both those attacks from the creatures, we'll call them, or the clickers, and threats from the outside world. I feel like if you watch The Walking Dead, it starts off and it's the only threats are the zombies. And then as it progresses, it's like now the zombies are a minor inconvenience and the threats are people. But this does a really good job of balancing both of those things as being threats the entire time.
Yes. The time jumps are really interesting through the season. But also with those two things, I think then there's that healthy balance of also just having the human element in the show, where the relationship between the two protagonists is really focused on as well, because it's really very important. Obviously, they're trying to set up a multi-season series, so we really need to be invested in the first season as to those two protagonists and the connection that they have.
Yeah,
and they do that well.
And I think I'm being very careful with my choice of words so as not to give anything away for the plot, but something that really intrigued me. There's a 9-episode series, and then episode 10 is kind of like a very brief, maybe half an hour making of. And all it made me want to do was play the game. And I'm certainly not someone who's a big gamer, but as soon as I heard like how loyal they were to the game and how similar the game was, and how it really made players of the games or the creators of the game quite emotional to be able to watch the show. Even a lot of the voice actors for the main characters in the game make appearances in the show, which is really cool.
Yeah.
So I'm desperate to play that game now. I think that would be awesome. And I as far as I know, it's pretty loyal to it.
So funny you bring that up. Students for the last few years, when we have done that zombie unit of study, have recommended this game for like going beyond just say the visual narrative stuff, like watching a film or a TV series, and some kind of other piece of media that's zombie related. They've said this game for years now. I'm just like you. I'm not a gamer, so I just don't know of it. But I'd be certainly interested to check it out.
But yeah, so those were my weekly watches.
Yes, as were mine.
Next up, we are trialing our news segment. This was recommended to us by Ethan at school. So thank you for that, Ethan. Essentially what this is, we just kind of check out the trailers that have been released in the last week, talk about things that we are either eagerly anticipating or things that we think might fall a little flat. But my first one was, and this is a bit of a cheat because they'd already released a trailer for it, but there was a new trailer for Indiana Jones, which I am very, very excited for. As someone, for those who hadn't heard the Indiana Jones podcast, Mr. Whittle's not a big Indiana Jones fan, but inexplicably is very excited for the new Indiana Jones. Well, I shouldn't say inexplicably. You've given an explanation as to why you're excited for it.
So this one's going to be directed by James Mangold, who has done some great other films, none of which come to mind. Oh, Logan. He did. Did you ever see that?
I did.
Yes. Well,
I'm surprised you saw it because you said you've never seen live-action Marvel. No, you said you'd never seen live-action Spider-Man.
Yeah, no, I've seen all the X-Men.
Okay.
Yeah. I like the X-Men series. But Logan was fantastic, and there's a few others that he's done. So this one's directed by James Mangold. It's also starring Phoebe Waller-Bridge in it, who I adore from Fleabag. When I watched this trailer, I'd forgotten that it's also starring Mads Mikkelsen.
Right.
And that is a big draw card. I will watch anything that guy signs up to.
So what is your go-to in terms of like Casino Royale or
I loved him.
Hannibal?
Hannibal as well is a fantastic series. Pretty much everything I've seen him in, he's strong. So yeah, the fact that this film stars Harrison Ford is just a minor inconvenience. Although I will say, watching, because this is the second trailer that's been released, right?
I think this is a better trailer, maybe.
I disagree in a sense that as soon as they started playing the Rolling Stones song on it, I'm like, what energy are you going for with this film? Now, I know sometimes the way a promotional department with it for a film puts a film out will be different to the way the film actually is. So maybe we won't ever hear that song in the film. It's just to kind of create a certain energy for a target market or whatever. But that was a bit icky for me, like having that song play for the preview.
I think the thing that kind of drew me in more for this one, I think the first trailer relied a lot on like grand spectacle and like special effects scenes where I felt there was more dialogue, character stuff in this scene that I really responded to. There wasn't as many, and this was a big point of contention when the first trailer dropped. There was some janky CGI in it, which obviously had people concerned after the fourth Indiana Jones was released with a lot of CGI instead of practical effects. So I think this one, to me, felt more grounded, felt more like a regular Indiana Jones adventure.
I don't know.
Classic Indiana Jones adventure.
The title is a bit schlocky for me. The Dial of Destiny. I mean, come on, mate. I mean, I know you're a fan of alliteration, so maybe you're looking past it, but Dial of Destiny, and
Well, I mean, look, if you look at any of the Indiana Jones, like that has received quite a lot of criticism, but what separates one title from the next in terms of they're all like, and here's this magical item that
that's
we're
true.
at the end of it.
Yeah, so maybe I'll not like this one just as much as I didn't like the others. Who knows?
Yeah, well, that's fine. Each to their own.
Yes.
The next one for me, continuing our trend of talking about sequels to films we've discussed on the podcast, there was a new Across the Spider-Verse trailer, which actually came out the day we did our Into the Spider-Verse podcast.
Right, okay.
Did you check this one out too?
Yes.
I sent you my list of trailers.
Yes,
so
I've seen all of them.
Yeah, so there we go. So I really enjoyed this. I'm quite eager for the new film. I mean, the fact that we've watched the first one again so recently had me super hyped.
Yeah, I don't know what I feel about this because it's more of the same, which most sequels are in a sense, right? It's certainly going to be more of this fantastic animation style that they've got. Totally on board for that. Very, very much the main draw card for me of this film was the animation. It just looks fantastic. We have some new characters, like the Spot.
Yeah. That looks like fun.
With the bread falling out of his stomach.
So good.
So I want new characters, obviously. So I'm all about that as well. But then I wonder how much they're going to elevate what the first one did and give us something that's still captivating. Yeah.
And look, that's always a tricky balance. I mean, you've been discussing it with the John Wick films. But I think that based on the fact that the first one is about Miles' origin, I think there is plenty more to explore without being almost hindered by the fact that you have to show him progressing and doing. How's he going to cope with his powers? This one's more about what comes next in terms of now the responsibility is on him as opposed to we need to get him to a place where he's ready for this.
Yeah, yep.
Fun new characters, return of some favourite old characters, which is great. Really looking forward to it.
I'll put forward the one trailer that I checked out, and I don't know, maybe you saw this one as well. It's the second Barbie trailer that they released. So this came out pretty much on the last day of school, actually. Well, certainly in the last week, where we get a little bit more from this trailer as to what we can expect in the film, but we still don't get a lot. We've talked about this with Nope, when Jordan Peele's Nope came out last year, and we didn't get too much in that trailer, which was fantastic because you don't want it, especially for a film like that. But this trailer is certainly showing you the world that the film's going to exist within.
Well, it's interesting you say that. I think it's only partially showing you the world that it's going to exist within, because my understanding is that we'll start in Barbie's world, but then Barbie will come to the real world.
Right. Okay, that's cool. Like, so have you done any reading on the film?
No,
I haven't.
But I don't think you could have a sustained narrative in that world. I think there's a lot of jokes to be had in terms of setting it up in that world, but then in order for the film to function, I think it'll be, well, what would it be like if something that functions in that world came to...
Yeah, I'll be interested now to see whether they do go down that path. But yeah, they haven't revealed it either way, really.
I've just got that sense when she's in the car and she's driving. It's almost like she's driving to the edge of her world.
Oh, they are going somewhere and they ask if Ken brought his rollerblades. I literally go nowhere without them. Like, I am a big fan of Ryan Gosling. I think that he is going to do a great service in this film as Ken. I saw there's Michael Cera is...
actually that is something I heard about. Apparently playing a character that was maybe an existing doll that was best friends with Ken.
Right.
And just they never remarketed him. So you can see there's all these different versions of Ken, there's all these different versions of Barbie, and then there's this one version of the doll, because I don't think it was a very popular doll.
Anyway, it's a Greta Gerwig film, which if anyone listened to the last podcast, her films like Lady Bird and Little Women, I'm a big fan of what she does, so I am very excited for this one as well. Big piece of copyright to play with, like proprietary info So I will be interested to see what she does with it.
Next one that I've got on the list is Running, which I was only sort of drawn to it because it's Danny Pudi, I think is the way that you pronounce it. He plays Abed on the show Community. I think he wrote and directed it himself, and he's starring in it, which always really intrigues me, especially when, as far as I know, he hasn't done too much in the way of writing and directing previously. He's mainly been the talent, but it looks really interesting. Again, it's one where not a lot of the narrative is given away, but it almost looks like a self-reflecting film. Like he goes into this world where it gets him to look back on his past as well.
Yeah.
You obviously watched it because I sent it to you.
Yeah, I was a bit confused by this trailer. I'm not as much of a fan of Danny Pudi as you are on Community and all that stuff. I watched the trailer and I'm like, what is this film actually going to be about? And I then, because I was curious, I went looking, and it's actually a short film. It's not going to be a feature-length film.
Oh, okay, right.
But there's not much revealed on the IMDb page for it either. In terms of how short a film, like a short film can still be a half an hour or a 45-minute thing. I was just a bit vague as to what this film is going to actually be. Yeah,
and I don't know that I'm overly interested in seeing it, but I'm certainly intrigued, probably because of how vague it was in the description. But I think it just looks quite artistic in terms of the design as well. Looks like it's probably going to be set in one specific location, maybe go to other locations from that central point, but almost like he's in this, it's almost like a theatre. Look, as I said, there's not much that I know about it, but I was intrigued.
So that's Running.
It is Running. And the final one is still a Michael J. Fox movie. So I saved this one till last because I got quite emotional when I watched the trailer for this. We've discussed it when we talked Back to the Future. It's one of my favorite films. And I adore Michael J. Fox. Even some of his horrible films, I always adore him in them. It looks like it's going to touch a lot on Back to the Future, but also looking at the bigger picture of his life and the Parkinson's that he has. And anytime I see stuff that he's doing, it always feels very inspirational, but at the same time, they're showing lots of clips of one of my favorite movies and showing a lot of stuff from behind the scenes, and he's talking about it. So how can it not make me feel emotional in that regard?
So I generally am in agreement with you. I certainly like Michael J. Fox as a person as well. So whenever I watch interview footage with him, he's a lovely human being. I did, after watching the trailer for this, I'm like, how many Michael J. Fox films outside of Back to the Future do I actually know and like? So I went through his IMDb, and there's not a great deal. Like, the outside of the three Back to the Futures.
No or like?
Well, like.
Okay.
I know quite a few more. Doc Hollywood was a big one for me when I was a kid. I liked that film quite a bit. I don't know whether it stands up today, but I remember fondly liking it. And The Frighteners as well.
Love The Frighteners.
That's not a bad one. But outside of that, I don't think his back catalogue is that strong.
As I said, it's not necessarily good films, but I love him and I have fondness for it. There was one he was in called The Secrets of My Success, which is basically, if you've ever heard of like How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying, it's almost like it's an adaptation of that.
Right.
He goes into this company and he has no real skills in that area, but he kind of weasels his way to the top. And it's just fun because he's charming in it. Yeah. Same as like Teen Wolf.
Teen Wolf, yeah. So like I need to go back and check out Teen Wolf because that was another one where as a kid I adored it, but everyone says it does not stand up as a film, but I don't know. Maybe they disagree with them. Like I'd have to watch it.
What about Teen Wolf 2 with Jason Bateman?
And then the final one I want to mention is Class of 1984. I don't know if you've ever seen that one.
I haven't seen that one, no.
But if nothing else, the theme song for that, I Am the Future, which is a very coked out Alice Cooper song from the mid-80s, is... Me and my friends absolutely adore that song for its cheesiness. Michael J. Fox, it's enough for me to be interested to watch the doco still, for sure.
This is a brand new segment, guys. We'd love to get some feedback on whether you want us to keep doing this. I really enjoy it because I'm always watching trailers. I love being able to discuss my anticipation with someone else. So if nothing else, it forces Wits to watch the trailers so that we can chat about them.
Yeah, so I mean, am not someone who actively seeks out trailers, but I certainly am aware of what's coming up. And so even if this segment does make me go, okay, well, I'll also go check out the trailer just so I can then talk about the things that I'm excited about, because there's a lot of stuff coming out this year that I am excited for. I'm all about it.
The other thing too to mention is that with weekly watches and what did I call it? Tantalising Trailers. With them back to back, it might seem like a bit too much of the same. So even if you'd like to recommend different ways of formatting the show, we could bookend our main discussion of a film with one of these segments each. Yeah, we'd just love to hear some feedback on what you think.
We also need to throw in our code word.
Oh, that's true. I don't have a code word for the day. Do you?
Let's just give it nacho, because we had a bit of a giggle about watching the Naatu Naatu sequence and then mishearing of nacho instead.
Yes.
So nachos. Let's make it nachos.
Nachos. That's good. I like that. Yeah. As always, guys, I do want to really encourage you to like and subscribe. That helps us out a lot. Also, check out the rest of the channel too. I've got some ideas floating around in my head. I won't put any pressure on myself to release anything in the near future, but do stay tuned because there's quite a few things that are right on the cusp. So yeah, please make sure that you are subscribed so you don't miss any of that stuff that comes up.
I really hope that this podcast and the recommendation to Mr. Brown and also to therefore all the other listeners of checking out this film has led to more people seeing this film, because like when I watched it, I hope that at least some of you have experienced the same joy that I experienced by getting turned on to this flick.
Quick reminder too that next week we will be talking about What Lies Beneath, if anyone wants to check that out in advance.
Cool.
That's all from me.
I'd certainly love to see student videos of the Naatu Naatu dance.
That'd be amazing.
When we come back in term 2.
I would love that. Thanks very much, guys.
Thanks, everyone. See ya.